Remember when I told y'all that when the federal government was creating what would eventually become the FBI, Congress was nervous about giving the government its own police force? One of the things they were worried about was spying. They didn't want some federal police force running around collecting information on Americans, which, knowing what I know now about J. Edgar Hoover, they probably should have stayed with that thought a little longer. Because Hoover eventually ran the FBI for 48 years. 8 presidents came and went while this man was still sitting in office. And I've always wondered how somebody stays in power that long. Then I started reading about his files, and it explained quite a bit. Hoover collected information on everybody: politicians, judges, activists, celebrities, people inside presidential administrations. And I'm not just talking about normal FBI investigative files. Hoover maintained sensitive material that was kept separately and tightly controlled. Affairs, sex lives, political information, allegations, embarrassing personal information, things that powerful people probably didn't want becoming public. And people in Washington knew he had it. Presidents knew, members of Congress knew. Even Richard Nixon, a man who wasn't exactly unfamiliar with collecting information on people, was recorded in the White House talking about Hoover's files, which is when you start understanding that firing this man wasn't exactly straightforward. Lyndon Johnson probably gave the best example. LBJ was once asked why he kept Hoover as the FBI director. And his answer was basically, it's better to have him inside the tent than outside aiming in. Now I'm cleaning that quote up a bit, but that's what he said. And I need you to appreciate what that actually means. The President of the United States was talking about the FBI director, like somebody you don't want mad at you because he knows too much. And Hoover did know too much. Now, this is where Hoover's private life became really interesting to me. Because while the FBI was collecting information about everybody else's sex life, the FBI was also investigating gay Americans. The Bureau maintained what had become known as a sex deviance program. And yeah, that's what they called it. The FBI collected enormous amounts of information about people suspected of being gay. That information could be shared with government agencies. People could lose security clearances. People could lose their jobs. This is what was happening during the broader Lavender Scare, when homosexuality was treated by the federal government as a security concern. So Hoover's FBI was actively helping a government system investigate people because of who they might be sleeping with. Remember that, because now we need to talk about Clyde Tolson. Clyde Tolson joined the FBI in 1928, and eventually he became Hoover's associate director, basically a number 2 at the Bureau. But their relationship went considerably beyond the office. These two men were together constantly. They rode to work together. They regularly ate lunch together. They ate dinner together. They went on vacations together. California, Florida, horse races. Trips together year after year. Hoover never married. Tolson never married. And this continued for decades, not a few years. Decades. And then Hoover dies in 1972. And guess who inherits most of his estate? Clyde Tolson. His home, his personal property. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. And at Hoover's funeral, the American flag from Hoover's coffin was presented to Tolson. Then when Tolson died a few years later, he was buried near Hoover at the Congressional Cemetery. So naturally, people have spent decades asking the obvious question: were J. Edgar Hoover and Clyde Tolson a couple? And the honest answer is, we don't know. There have been claims, there have been rumors. There have been books written about it. There's even that famous story about Hoover wearing women's clothing at a party, but that particular story has serious credibility problems. So I'm not going to hand it to you as fact just because it's salacious, you know? I don't need that, because what we can document is already interesting enough. Hoover and Tolson had an incredibly close personal relationship that lasted for more than 40 years, and whatever the private nature of that relationship was, went with them. But here's what I can't get past. Hoover didn't need proof that somebody was gay before his FBI could become interested in their personal life. Suspicion could be enough to generate scrutiny. Rumors could matter, associations could matter. But Hoover himself? There were rumors about him too. And when people publicly made allegations about Hoover's sexuality, the FBI sometimes investigated the people making those claims. Just think about that for a second. This man's bureau was collecting information, private information, about other people's sexuality, while the FBI was also paying attention to people talking about his. That is fascinating. Fascinatingly hypocritical. Because whatever Hoover and Tolson were to one another, the standard that Hoover's FBI applied to everyone else would have made their own relationship worth investigating. And somehow, that file doesn't seem to have been the priority. J. Edgar Hoover spent nearly half a century running an institution that became incredibly good at knowing things about other people. Who they talked to, where they went, what organizations they joined, who they slept with, what they did when they thought nobody was watching. He understood better than almost anybody in Washington that information was power. And then he died. And the woman who guarded his office for more than 50 years started feeding his files into a shredder. Everybody else's secrets became government record. Hoover's became confetti.